welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing my February wrap up. I'm going to try to make this relatively quick because I have already talked about a lot of them in various other reviews. Like I have done a video review, and I also wrote Goodreads reviews for the majority of these, and then some of them I just don't have a ton to say about, so I am going to try to make it relatively quick, but let's just jump right in. I ended up reading 12 books in the month of February, and I DNF'd one, so 13 books total. I only listened to audiobooks this month. 10 of the books were on my physical TBR already, which if you watched my goals video, you'll know is one of my goals this year, to read the books that I already own. Then the other 3 I got from the library. I did do one reread this month. The video still hasn't come out. I have filmed it, I just haven't edited it, but I've talked about it in my goals video, my January wrap up, and now my February wrap up, about how I'm going to be doing a video talking about all the books that I want to reread as, like, you know, favorite book contenders. I want to try to figure out kind of like what my all-time favorite books are. And so in February, I decided to read The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, the first book in the Broken Earth trilogy. If you don't know, the Broken Earth trilogy is set in a world where there are these people called origins, and they have the ability to move the earth in ways. It has to do with a lot with like the shifting of tectonic plates and just the general like being like one with the elements, I guess. I'm terrible at explaining it. I don't really know. But in the first book, you follow 3 different characters who are in different stages of understanding their role as origins. And it's kind of a mystery, and it's also just like this epic fantasy adventure. And I really love this book. I think that I appreciated it so much more on a reread because all of the things that you figure out as you're reading the first time around, you know the second time. So you're getting to like see the little clues that she's placed, and just like seeing how all the pieces come together, like knowing the end, like going through the journey again was just, it was honestly, I think I loved it more the second time around because I appreciated the craft of this book so much more. I honestly think this is like one of the most masterfully written books that I've ever read, and it's made me definitely excited to continue on with the trilogy and finally get around to reading books 2 and 3. My love for the series is reignited by rereading book 1. So I'm really excited. I actually have an old review of this one from when I originally read it. I went back and watched it, and man, I did not do a good job reviewing this book the first time around, but I'll link it down below if you want to go and check it out. I really love this. Highly recommend. I think that everybody should read it. Next up, let's just stick with the fantasy train and talk about Jade City by Fonda Lee. I'm not going to talk too much about this one either because I have already done a full video review of this. This is an epic fantasy. It's the first book in a fantasy trilogy that is so hyped. Like, I'm sure that you've seen at least one person review this trilogy on YouTube at some point in the last year or so. But it's set in a city that is basically ruled by jade, and certain people have the ability to use jade to harness their abilities, their fighting abilities, their perception, focus, all that. It mainly follows this one family who are involved in the No Peak clan. They're actually kind of the leaders of the No Peak clan and the impending war with another clan in the city. It was so fantastic. Like, I really loved every aspect. Every second of reading this book, I was having a good time. All that being said, it's not a 5-star read for me, and that's a little bit disappointing considering that I did put this on my 5-star predictions for 2022. There were just a couple of things that I found myself like having more questions and never got answers, which obviously isn't really fair to hold that against the book because I'm sure that those answers will come in later books in the series. But also there were a couple characters in here that I just, every time we got back to reading from their perspective, I just dreaded it. So I did like knock it down a little bit for that, which again, probably not fair to the book, but it is what it is. I'm sorry, my chair is so squeaky. Overall, really enjoyed this. So glad that I finally got around to the first book in this trilogy. This is definitely another series that I want to read it in its entirety this year. I really liked this. I totally understand the hype. Recommend 100%. Like, it's really, really good. Next up, I'm going to talk about a couple books that were actually the ends of a couple series, the second and third books of series that I was aiming to finish. So I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, obviously being like not the first book in the series, can't go into too much detail. But I did read Our Dark Duet by Victoria Schwab. This is the second and final book in the Monsters of Verity duology, the first book being This Savage Song. This Savage Song I read back in, I think, 2018 or 2019 maybe. It's been quite a few years, and I think my enjoyment of the second second book was definitely hampered by the fact that it's been so long since I read book 1. This is a YA dystopian series. It's set in a world where different kinds of crime, different kinds of sin create different kinds of monsters, and the main characters of this book are a human girl who kind of wants to be a monster. Her dad is like a big crime boss, and she is desperate for his attention and his approval, so she really wants to be as evil as he is, basically. Then also a boy who is a monster, who is just desperate to kind of be a human. He just wants to live a normal life, and he doesn't want to be a monster. Their paths cross in the first book, and they form a friendship, and it leads to various antics and situations throughout the first book and then into this one that lead to them helping to save the city in certain ways. I think it's a fun series. Like, it's action-packed. There's always something happening. I also really appreciate that it's not romance-centered, but it has been so long since I read the first book, and I think that I probably would have enjoyed this quite a bit more if I had read it closer to when I read the first one. But it was a nice ending to the series. I definitely found a lot of it to be predictable. There were some twists and turns that I think were supposed to be shocking that I predicted pretty early on or was not surprised by. But there were a couple moments where I was genuinely shocked. A couple of character deaths that I didn't see coming. So I did enjoy it. I didn't love it as much as I wanted to, but I definitely would recommend the duology as a whole if it's something that sounds interesting to you. Obviously, Victoria Schwab is a pretty well-known and well-loved author here on BookTube, so you've probably already read this if you're going to, but if not, if it sounds like something you might like, then I'd recommend it. And I also did really enjoy the audiobook. The other series that I completed this month was the Imperium trilogy. I read Lightbringer by Claire Legrand. This is the third book in the trilogy. I read the second book, Kingsbane, last month, and the first book I read back in 2020. It was one of my favorite books that year. I feel like I've talked about this plot so much recently because I just read book 2, but if you don't know, this series is set in a world where there's this prophecy that said that 2 queens will rise. One is a blood queen, and she is destined to destroy the world, and one is a sun queen, and she is destined to save it. And it follows 2 different women who are very obviously the blood queen and the sun queen. I really enjoyed this conclusion to the trilogy. I did feel like it was a bit long, and there were some moments that I felt like didn't need to be there. There were some character perspectives that we read from that I didn't really care about. There was like a section right in the middle, or like probably like around here, that was just like the same thing happening over and over, and I was like, why do we keep doing this? Like, these chapters are the same. Let's cut some of this out and like move the story along. But overall, I was really satisfied with how the book ended. I would say that in terms of like my enjoyment of the trilogy as a whole, the first book is my favorite, and then this one, and then Kingsbane was my least favorite. But I think it's a really great trilogy overall. Is this trilogy going to be for everyone? No, probably not. But if it sounds like something that you might be interested in, I would definitely recommend at least reading book 1, because book 1 is really, really good. And if you like that one, then continue on with the trilogy. While we're talking about series, I'll just go ahead and talk about the series that I read in its entirety in February, and that was the Bareknuckle Bastards series by Sarah MacLean. This is a historical romance series following these 3 brothers. They were all born bastards, and their father makes them compete to basically be legitimized to become the next duke. Each book follows a different brother and their romance. I went into this excited because I'd seen some really good reviews for it, but I thought it was all right. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I just found it pretty middling. I just think that I don't love historical romance where the heroes are just so intense all the time, and they're like, I love you, but I can't be with you because we are different stations, and also I'm a bad guy and you don't want to love me, and all this other stuff. It felt very repetitive and tedious. Like, the first book was fine, and then basically the same thing happens in book 2, and I found that to be just so insufferable in book 2, and then book 3 is a little bit different, but again, just I didn't love it. If you're a historical romance fan and you haven't read these, maybe give them a go. It's really up to you. I personally didn't like them as much as I wanted to, and it's not like a go-to recommendation for me, but they were fine. Like, they weren't the worst things I've ever read. Next up, let's talk about some YA contemporary. I've mentioned quite a bit recently, I feel like I've talked about it quite a bit recently, that I'm not really loving the YA contemporary so much anymore. I used to read it a ton, and now I'm just basically trying to get through the YA contemporary that I own on my physical TBR. In an effort to do that, I started American Royals by Katherine McGee. This is the first book in what is apparently a trilogy. I thought it was only a duology, but I guess there's a 3rd book coming out later this year. And it follows a world, essentially, where after the Revolutionary War, instead of becoming the president, George Washington became the king, and this follows like the current day royal family, the descendants of George Washington. It follows 4 different perspectives, 4 different girls that are in some way associated with the royal family, either directly because they're in it, or because they dated someone in the royal family, or they're best friends with someone in the royal family. And there's just so much drama and angst and just craziness in this book that I didn't like it at all, to be honest. I started reading it physically and then I wasn't liking it, and so I was like, maybe it's just because I'm not in the mood to read something physically, so I switched to the audiobook. I'm glad that I switched to the audiobook, but also I wish I would have just DNF'd it because I really didn't like it. The only reason that I pushed through and finished it is because Cole bought this book for me, and he literally never buys me books, and so I felt really bad that I wasn't enjoying it, so I just pushed through and finished it since he bought it for me, spent money on it. There's so much drama, and also these characters are all like well off. They are obviously somehow associated with a royal family. 2 of the main characters in this book are princesses, and they have everything. They have access to everything. They have money and influence and power, and they spend so much of the book complaining and whining. I understand that everybody has problems, but to just complain for 400 pages about your problems that are so superficial in comparison to a lot of problems, it was very frustrating because there was no acknowledgement of like privilege or anything. It was just, why is my life not going exactly how I want it to go? It just annoyed me. It just really annoyed me. I will not be continuing on with this series. I was going back and forth after I finished it. I was like, maybe it gets better, but I read some reviews and apparently the second book is even worse. So I'm done with it. This just solidified what I already knew to be true, which is that I don't love contemporary, YA contemporary. And the other YA contemporary that I read was actually a little collection of short stories, and it was called Blackout by Danielle Clayton, Tiffany D. Jackson, Nick Stone, Angie Thomas, Ashley Wood Folk, and Nicola Yoon. Prior to me reading this book, I had read from all of these authors before, aside from Ashley Wood Folk, and so I was excited to get into this because I heard some really good reviews for it. It is basically a set of short stories following a variety of characters during a blackout in New York City. There's one story that is kind of like the connecting story of all of these. It spans the entire book. In each of those sections, you kind of get a glimpse of the characters coming up in the next story. There is a lot of drama and angst because it's a YA contemporary set of short stories, and it takes place over the course of a few hours, so everything's condensed. I did think it was a really good collection, and I really liked the stories overall. My favorite stories in the collection were Nick Stone's story, which was Mask Off, which I knew I was going to love that one because I really love Nick Stone. I think she's an incredible writer, and I've loved everything I read by her. And then I also really enjoyed The Long Walk by Tiffany D. Jackson, which was the one that was spread out throughout the book. I thought that she just did a really good job of stretching it out throughout the course of the book and weaving in like little glimpses of the other characters in the other stories really seamlessly. I really enjoyed it. Overall, it's not like a groundbreaking read or anything. I didn't like fall in love with it. It's not a new favorite, but I really enjoyed it. Next up, I'm going to talk about The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. I think it's the first horror book that I've ever read. And I picked it up because Stephen Graham Jones gets a lot of rave reviews. A lot of the times he's got a lot of popular books. I feel like he's gained quite a bit of popularity in the last couple of years on BookTube, and everybody seems to love his books and his writing style. Also, on the back of the book here, it says, "A Tale of Revenge, Cultural Identity, and the Cost of Breaking from Tradition in this latest novel from the Jordan Peele of horror literature." I really like Jordan Peele movies, and so I was excited to read a book that had kind of like a similar feeling, similar atmosphere to a Jordan Peele movie. And I would say that it definitely does have that feeling. It's definitely kind of like an eerie, the suspense, the creepiness, the horror factor creeps up on you throughout the course of the story. This follows a set of characters who, when they were younger, they went hunting and they ended up illegally killing some elk on their reservation, and to like pay the price for that, they are forbidden from ever hunting on the land again. And 10 years later, they are still kind of being haunted by what they did that day. I did think that it was creepy, and I definitely feel like the suspense got you because you are reading these sections and you see what happens in one section and you move on to the next and you're like, how can it get crazier? And then somehow it does. My issue with the book was that I definitely didn't love the super graphic imagery, especially when it comes to the death of animals. It's something that I really cannot handle in books, and I knew going into this that there was going to be some of that. I was prepared, or at least I thought I was prepared, and then it was happening to a greater degree than even I prepared myself for, which is totally on me. It's not the book's fault. Also, I was confused for the first, I'd say probably like 100 pages of the book. I really didn't understand what was going on, and it took me a little bit to kind of like figure out what was happening and like be in the story, because I was just so confused about like what I was reading. Also, I do think the ending kind of was, I didn't love it because it felt like there was a moral to the story. It felt like there was a lesson that the book was trying to teach you. It really just, it ended in a way that I wasn't totally prepared for. And after reading like 300 pages of like this horrible, like graphic stuff happening, for it to end the way it did kind of surprised me. And I kind of wish that he had just gone there. Like I wish he would just have gone all the way. I think I would probably read more from this author in the future, but I didn't love this as much as I wanted to. And I think it just boils down to the fact that horror in general is not really for me. I don't love horror movies. I haven't read a ton of horror fiction. It was fine. Like I totally understand the hype, and I thought it was well written, and I get why people love it, but I think at the end of the day I just decided that it's just not really for me. Next up, I've got here The Book of Essie by Megan McLean Weir. I got this from Book of the Month way back in June 2018. It's been on my TBR for a while, and it has survived several unhauls. I've put it in the unhaul pile multiple times and then took it out and finally decided I'm gonna read it this month. This follows a girl named Essie, who is the daughter of a famous preacher. They are on this TV show called Six of Hicks, and it's all about the father's like ministry and the family in general. And at the beginning of the book, at the very beginning, we find out that Esther is pregnant, and the producers of the TV show and her mom are trying to decide what to do, how to spin this so as not to anger their fans. Esther has no say in what happens, and there's kind of this mystery from basically the beginning. You don't know, and it's pretty clear that it's not going to be revealed for quite a while. We don't know who the father of Esther's baby is, Essie's baby is. The whole book is just about her trying to live her life and do the right thing for herself and for her child. I thought the book was really well written. I found Essie to be a really strong main character, and I enjoyed reading from her perspective. We also follow the perspective of a couple other people that are related to the situation, and I do think for the length of the book, it's just over 300 pages. I do think that the author did maybe try to tackle a little bit too much, because the other two main narrators also have some personal stuff going on, and I think that she tried to solve all of their problems and tell their stories in a smaller amount of time. Like she should have either lengthened the book or taken some of that out. I think it's a really interesting commentary on commercializing faith and basically selling this family as the ultimate beacons of Christianity, when obviously there's some more sinister stuff going on behind closed doors. It has a lot to say about that, and I think that obviously it's a commentary, a wider commentary on something like 19 Kids and Counting and the Duggar family. I think it's just really interesting, and so I enjoyed it and I would recommend it. And finally, the last book I'm going to talk about, the last book that I ended up reading in the month of February, was Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. I don't have my physical copy to hold up because I lent it to my best friend. This ended up being my favorite book that I read in the month of February, aside from my reread of the 5th season. It follows a woman named Kiko, who is a clerk at a convenience store, and she is completely happy with her life. She's been working there for 18 years, and she really enjoys the routine that this job provides. She has the same schedule every day. She does the same things. She doesn't care to get a better job. She doesn't care to date or have a family. She just likes to go to her job. Her family doesn't understand why. Her friends don't understand why she doesn't want a boyfriend or want to get married or have a family or get a better paying job. She doesn't know how to communicate to them that she's completely satisfied with her life. When I was reading reviews for this book, a lot of people kept saying that it was quirky and fun. And those are not words that I particularly would use to describe this book. I found it to be quite sad, to be honest. I felt like there was a little bit of a undertone of sadness that I wasn't quite prepared for. Kiko just wants to be accepted for who she is, and she doesn't understand why her family wants her to do more when she's completely fine with her life as it is. I think when you're reading a book like this through the lens of Kiko, who is perfectly happy to go to work every day and live her life and just be content with what she's got. It really puts into question like societal expectations for women and why people are forced to do more than what they want to. Kiko pays her bills and she is feeding herself, like she eats dinner, and you know, she has a job, she's a functioning member of society, and she doesn't understand why anybody would want more from her because she's fine with what she has. I found it very interesting. I really enjoyed it. It had a lot of really interesting things to say, and I'm glad that I read it. I definitely want to read more from Sayaka Murata because I think that she's a really talented author, and I think that she has just like this really interesting writing style that could lend itself to pretty much any type of story. I really enjoyed this book. It ended up being a surprisingly fantastic read, and like I said, my favorite that I read this month. So if it sounds like your thing, then I would suggest picking it up. And I also really enjoyed the audiobook. So those are the 12 books that I read in the month of February. I was hoping to make this a relatively quick video, and I think I'm already at almost an hour of filming, so we'll see how long the edited product turns into. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in this video and what you thought about them. Do you have similar or different opinions to mine? I'd really love to know. Also, let me know some books that you read in the month of February, or maybe your favorite book that you read in February. I'd really love to know that as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you again very soon. Bye!